Hey everyone, welcome to another video. So this one's a little bit different because, as you maybe saw in a recent community post I made here on YouTube or on my stories on Instagram, I recently hit 10,000 subscribers here on YouTube. And first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone on here for all of the support over the past, it's been around half a year already. It really means a lot, and I'm very happy to have reached this point, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this YouTube thing goes from here. I'm glad you've been enjoying the videos so much so far. So for this one, I thought I would do something a little bit different. I've been collecting some questions to do this as a bit of a Q&A video, and yeah, I'll just go through these questions throughout the video, and I hope you enjoy it. So the first question I've got is, what are my top 5 species or families to photograph? And yeah, the first one that I think is very clear for me are globular springtails. This is just something that have always been a favorite subject of mine since I've known they existed, and it's really nice to have them, especially during the winter when there's not that many other things around. I find it's possible to get such a variety of different compositions, high magnification, lower magnification with more context. I just really enjoy photographing springtails. Another one for me are cuckoo wasps. This is something I photographed a lot less than springtails or globular springtails, but recently I got one of my very, very favorite pictures of these, and they just look so beautiful, and they have such intricate details and textures that I always like when I can manage to photograph one. Another group, bit of a bigger group, are crab spiders. There's a big variety of these, and they all look so interesting and have these very interesting faces, and I think they're just very well suited to high magnification portraits and macro. If you can find a prey scene, even better, that's really cool. Another thing for sure, and another subject that I photograph very rarely, are mantises, just because there are hardly any here in Germany. But when I do get to see them in the right season, and around now is the season, so I'm hopefully even going to find some this year, but generally mantises are always so much fun to photograph. Last year in summer I was in Greece visiting family and saw quite a few different mantises, and was just able to get some of my very favorite pictures of those that I really love. And the final thing, it's a bit tough, I wasn't really sure, but one thing that I also really enjoy photographing are robber flies. They also just look really, really cool. If you can find a prey scene, it's great. Yeah, just a really interesting subject for macro. So the next question is kind of related to the last one. It is, what is my favorite bug, arachnid, or animal for focus stacking? And my answer kind of falls into one of the previous categories, but I thought I would go more for something that is even just kind of easy or possible to get good focus stacks of. And I thought I'd go with one that I managed to photograph properly for the first time early this year, which is a specific kind of running crab spider, which is Philodromos margaritatus. These are a decent size, which means that it's possible to get quite close portraits of them. They also have quite a bit of variation in the species, and they tend to be staying quite still under bark when I've found them, which means that it's generally possible to get quite good focus stacks of them. And I've gotten a couple of portraits of them, which I'll show now, which are some of my very favorite spider portraits I've gotten. Okay, so the next question I've got is, with what camera did I start and who inspired me the most? And as far as what camera I started with, the first camera that I had that I really got into macro photography with was Lumix G7, and initially I actually started doing macro just with a Raynox 250 macro clip on another lens, but eventually once I got a little bit more seriously into macro, I got the Olympus 60mm macro. And before that actually though, I had a few different little tough cameras, these actually underwater cameras, but they're also just very rugged, and that was nice because I could just throw it in my bag, always have it with me, and they actually had quite a decent macro function as well, most of these. So I have a few shots of bugs. I'll see if I can dig them out from, what, 5-6 years ago even, and yeah, I'll see if I can show a few of those. As far as who inspired me, it's really hard to limit it down to just a few people because there's so many inspiring and helpful people on the macro community and the macro community on Instagram, YouTube, everywhere. To rattle off a few, just in Instagram, a few people that have been around doing macro long before I started and were very present in the community when I was getting started out is for sure Laurent Nam on Instagram, and Rory Invertebrain, definitely Florian Macroflodzel. Yes, so many inspiring people on Instagram. Also on YouTube, for sure, also with me getting into YouTube now, was Thomas Shahan. I feel like he was an inspiration for basically everyone who's doing macro these days, because he's just been doing it for so long, and definitely a big inspiration behind these videos. Yes, so many more people. I wish I could name everyone, but that would take up an hour at least, so that's all I've got for now. Next question I've got, someone asks how I find out the species names of my subjects, and are there any particular apps that I use to help me when I go out. Someone else asked about photography apps. And definitely a big one, the biggest one for me is iNaturalist, is a platform, community science platform that I use partly to help with getting identification, because the community is so helpful with identifying subjects, and so that's a big one. Though that is not the only place I get my species IDs. For certain groups I use different online photo keys and so on, or just know people that I can get in touch with. That's kind of the main app that I use in the field for species identification. And photography too, I use just the Lumix app to connect to my video camera sometimes for helping with videos, but otherwise there's not really that much. Obviously I use various things to keep track of weather, that kind of thing, but I don't know if I would really count those specifically to photography things. Alright, so the next question I've got is how I got started in photography, and whether I went straight into macro or if that came later, and also what kind of photography I enjoy apart from macro photography now. So as far as when I got into photography, I definitely started out more through nature observation. I was quite into bird watching for a while, and started out more doing bird photography in general, nature photography, and eventually got more and more interested in smaller subjects. I think especially during the COVID lockdown, I spent a lot of time, because I couldn't go that far away. There's so many small insects and small animals that I could find really close to home in the city. So I think that's when I got especially interested in smaller things and got more deeply interested in macro photography. And that kind of answers the second question as well. I didn't start out with macro. I got more into that later on, though I have been doing nature photography all along. And these days, while macro is definitely my main focus, I do still occasionally enjoy doing some bird photography and nature photography in general, and occasionally just all like general purpose photography, whatever you want to call it, just everyday photography. Or if I have my camera with me, I'll often do some landscape photos, that sort of thing. Mostly macro, but I kind of dabble in other stuff and enjoy other kinds of photography as well. Alright, next question is a little bit more gear related, is can you use a DSLR for macro? It seems to make focus stacking more challenging. Absolutely, you can use a DSLR for macro. You can use basically any camera for macro photography as long as you've got a good lens and good lighting. Those aspects are much more important. With a DSLR, obviously it'll bring some different challenges to using a mirrorless camera, but really most of the differences don't have a big impact on macro photography. So yeah, any camera really will work. Lighting and lenses are much more important. Okay, this one's a fun one. If I could travel anywhere for macro photography, where would I go and why? And I think the first thing that springs to mind for sure is somewhere tropical, Borneo or Madagascar or Central America like Costa Rica, just because of the huge variety of different arthropods and other animals there are to photograph. And there's just so many interesting subjects. I know a few people who've been in the tropics for macro, and it just looks really amazing. So that's definitely something I would love to do one day. Also, places like, I think New Zealand comes to mind as a place that I've always wanted to go, and I think would be interesting for macro too, because there's such unique fauna there, very different from a lot of other places. Oh, for sure Australia as well. Just so many interesting subjects, especially for spiders, just amazing. Realize that's quite a few now that I've said, but yeah, those are the main ones. I would love to, just in general, traveling anywhere for macro photography is always fun, because especially with insects, there's such a different diversity of species wherever you go. Yeah. Okay, so the next question is technical and quite long, but basically this person is asking how I move the camera during a focus stacking series, whether I always go a little bit further forward in one motion, or if I go kind of randomly forward and backwards. And I've explained this briefly in other videos, and I plan to do a much more in-depth video on my focus stacking process for manually focus stacking at some point. But pretty much, yeah, I do move in one motion. It takes some practice to get this smooth motion at the right pace and not miss any frames, but I generally start at the front of the subject, start shooting a burst, and then move further back through the subject as I'm shooting the burst. How fast I go depends on the burst rate of the camera. With my Fuji camera now, I can go at 15 frames per second, which means I can move quite fast. Depends on the magnification as well. There's a whole lot of things to kind of factor in, but with some practice, I don't really think about it that much. And it's not as difficult as you might think to move the camera forward in one motion for stacking, and it gets much more consistent results than just randomly back and forth. The next question, I'll just go right after this because it's very closely related, is what my workflow for stacking the images is, which I think means more in post. Again, another thing that I definitely want to do, maybe even a few videos on post-processing focus stacking, because it's such a big topic. Maybe over winter when I can't do as many outdoor videos. I use Zarine Stacker for processing focus stacks, but basically my workflow is applying a simple edit to each photo and copying it to all of the photos in the stack in Lightroom, then exporting all of the individual frames from Lightroom. Then I stack them in Zarine Stacker, run the final retouched stack through Topaz Denoise for noise reduction, for a bit of sharpening, and then finally bring that final image into Lightroom again to do some final edits, some masking. I work quite a lot with masks in my photo editing. That's basically my workflow explained very briefly. Definitely more videos coming on this later though. So next up I've got, do I plan to do photography as a career or will I keep it as a hobby? And this is a very difficult one, and luckily I don't really have to make that decision. Along with macro photography, I'm also very much interested in the more scientific side of biology, entomology, and definitely want to continue in that direction as well. But both things are very much combined, and if I had to kind of imagine a career, imagine a path, I feel like I would like to do something where I can continue with both, with the more creative photography side of things as well as the more scientific approach. Okay, so I've gotten to the final question, which is what are the top 5 species on my bucket list, or that I really want to see. One species that I've tried to photograph a lot, that I don't actually see that uncommonly, and that I would really, really love to get a proper good portrait of, a good photo of, are tiger beetles. These are just so difficult to photograph in my experience. I've only ever seen them during midday when they're extremely active, and generally they barely even let you get close enough to get even an identification photo. So I would love to get an opportunity to photograph a tiger beetle more close up. Another species that I have photographed but I would love to get better photos of are a kind of ground beetle called Elaphris cupreus, which are found in swampy habitats and have this very cool kind of copper color with really vivid bluish purple spots on their wing cases. Very, very beautiful species. Another couple, for sure, green huntsman spiders are awesome. I've never seen one, but I would love to. Same with an adult antlion. Antlions, you know, is the larvae that make these kind of funnel traps to catch ants. The larvae are awesome as well, actually. I'd love to photograph one of the larvae, but the adults are just such cool looking creatures. And finally, probably I would have to say like a purseweb spider are very, very cool. This was actually a bit difficult to come up with this list because I've found and photographed quite a few of my bucket list subjects this season. Like damselflies and dragonflies covered in dew. I got some very, very nice photos that I'm very happy with on just one night with the perfect conditions for forming dew, which was very exciting for me this year. And another subject that I'd wanted to see for a very long time, I finally got to see on this trip to Canada recently, is an jagged ambush bug, which are just some of the most wild looking creatures. They're really, really interesting, and I got some photos of those that I'm very happy with this season. Alright, so that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this kind of different video. As always, if you have any other questions, you're welcome to leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to get to them to answer them. Yeah, I haven't posted a video in a little while because I've back at school and it's just been quite busy with that, but I've got one more video that I filmed in Canada, and I've got a few more projects coming up, so definitely more videos coming soon. For now, thank you very much for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. So this one's a little bit different because, as you maybe saw in a recent community post, yep. And definitely when I got started, how did I get into, wait, what was the question again?